Kept it.
So,
There was a settlement in June 1997. It was on CNN. What was that?
that was the first attempt uh, that the delegation, Mike Moore, Attorney General of Mississippi, put together in the states, and this was in the Senate. The effects of this would have been to immunize the tobacco industry from lawsuits and accomplish basically the objectives of what Big Tobacco had in mind for many, many years, and what I saw while I was working inside the rooms of Brown and Williamson's second floor, where the law department was set up. And the idea was, if you couldn't get immunity from a government entity, if you were in real deep danger, then it would be available in one way or another. At some point in time, they envisioned this kind of thing. So on that particular June of 1997, Mike Moore had come to an agreement through the works of Trent Lott and Scruggs and the Rice law firm, and those were the basic movers and shakers. But at this particular time in history, I remember turning on CNN, and I had gotten a heads up from Fox in Louisville, and of course we'd worked very hard both in Louisville and down here in Mississippi. And he said, turn on the TV set and to CNN because they're making some kind of announcement. And
Did Mike Moore appear?
yeah, Mike Moore appeared together with a bevy of the settling attorneys general from various states. I don't know, it might have been a dozen or so on board. But it was an event. It was a PR event, and it was highly charged with a bunch of people who were standing and waiting for a microphone. First, there was a microphone. And
was there a long period of waiting for the announcement? Why? For what reason?
Well, I think that one of the geniuses of this whole program of Mike Moore and company was a public relations campaign, which he states liberally on several occasions when he starts his arbitration proceedings with and for Dick Scruggs and the Rice or Ron Motley. So it was a period where, I don't know, it must have been 10-20 minutes where you're staring at a microphone. And the CNN people were looking at what might happen, and nobody knows. And then you get some kind of brief statement, probably fed to the press, that there was a holdup because of the Diva, and I couldn't figure it. It was Jeffrey Wigand.
And who is Jeffrey Wigand?
He's the man. He is the man who knew too much. I believe that in the formula that Mike Moore had developed, not only did it have two windfall experts, but according to the program that was set out, once they'd confiscated and disseminated the documents and while Wigand, Jeffrey Wigand, was a high-ranking official who'd been fired in, I believe it was '93. He took absolutely nothing with him, and he wouldn't have known anything that would be significant until, well, in 1994, in January of 1994, I know that he was working for the tobacco company as a witness, protecting his own interests, and in that early part in January, I've read the transcript. There's absolutely no information given to the Justice Department, and at that time also, Lowell Bergman was handling him. I know because of the admissions made to me in Frontline when Lowell Bergman was in charge of that as well. When I learned a lot of different things that came down, but
Were you informed previously about this announcement?
absolutely
What
not.
was your
No.
reaction?
Well, my first reaction was you're missing somebody, because my first reaction, it was, why are you building this up? There was so much tension, and they were announcing that they were reaching a settlement. Well, this is part of drama. This is part of how you create a scene where people are in expectation of something. And
who called you or spoke with you from the press?
There were I got a couple of calls that came from Fox in Louisville. He said turn on the TV. So
when Fox called you, what did you say?
well, what I understood was that they were making an announcement. I was in Mississippi, and that for the longest time they kept people waiting, and so I just hung up for a moment, and I watched the proceedings, and they made an announcement about the Diva, Jeffrey Wigand, that was something to do with, it didn't make a bit of sense to me because I knew Brian Williamson fairly well, and while they were conservative, if they were going to make an announcement and they were going to hold up an entire force majeure of a kind of instrumental thing that had been passed through Senate and was being made, it would not be about what they were about to tell me or tell the audience, and that was that Jeffrey Wigand was not going to be dismissed. And so, part of the dramatic point of this, and I believe that they had some fairly, well, you don't really need skill to figure this out. If you want to hold somebody up in this, and you make a pledge that what are you doing? You're doing a teaser, and they were teasing the audience, and the tease wasn't even realistic. I couldn't believe, how in the world would they not do what they were saying? They were saying that at the last minute, the very last minute, while they were there were some executives from Brown and Williams. So look, hey, these executives had been with them for a very long time, certainly years, and all of a sudden they decide, well, we're not going to dismiss Jeffrey Wigand from his lawsuits. What lawsuits? I mean, I've read his lawsuits, and essentially what was in his lawsuits it's just a hype, and essentially what he every time he came out in public, and especially in the hearing down here in Pascagoula, which was hyped by Lowell Bergman, he was supposed to come out and say something, and he did. and he was violating a court order, and yet he was never in any more jeopardy than I was as far as the people of Brown and Williamson, because the only thing he could lose would be his salary, which by then he had already made a deal of some sort. So his post-firing salary and benefits. There's just no way that I read his lawsuits. His lawsuits were nothing. And so why would Brown and Williamson say no? I'm not saying this out of a sense of duty to redefine a majestic individual in their PR network. I am just defining it as it appears, which is that Jeffrey Wigand did not have much of a lawsuit against him, and he had nothing to lose. And if it were something to lose, it certainly played into that spirit of the people who were instrumental, Mike Moore, instrumental in trying to make this look like a big event. And it was held up. So when it finally did come up, there was this roar of applause for Jeffrey Wigand, the Diva, and the man who knew too much, who was really being pumped and had been pumped for several years, and was on his way toward the Michael Mann interpretation, which was done a couple of years later.
So what happened to that 97 settlement?
Nothing. It was quashed in the Senate. Well, that's not nothing, but it was quashed in the Senate because of law firm. The law firms weren't going to get as much money as they wanted, and there were a lot of Republicans and Democrats who, actually Republicans, I think more than Democrats, who were thinking that if they could just get it down to a reasonable amount, and then it was too high. The amount of money was too high. It was in the 400 billion mark. But anyway, it was quashed by the brother-in-law of Trent Lott. Probably they attributed it to McCain, but I doubt it.
And what happened later? There was an attorney general's meeting in a resort in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Right? So
Jackson
did you
Hole.
try to reach Scruggs about Wigand's dismissal?
Well,
What was that?
What I was interested in, since nobody really knows this, because there was no PR in terms of what was held secret in the troughs of the PR world of Mike Moore and Dick Scruggs, particularly. What was interesting is when getting to to this man who had this lawsuit that came from 1995, not the one that was in Louisville since 93, but the one from 95 was crucial in the sense that Fox had said to me with regard to the conference, the news conference. He said, well, Mike Moore said that he was going to leave no prisoners behind on the beach, and I'd like to see his military career on that, because Fox came out with the line that no, he didn't, but he certainly shot you on the beach. So basically, I had two lawsuits. And the one that really affected Dick Scruggs and all these people down here in Mississippi, including the Attorney General, was a federal lawsuit.
And did Dickie Scruggs tell you how this PR event affected you?
I couldn't get him, for one. I was calling Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in the hotel, and I called and left messages and went on and on and on. And I finally talked to a fellow who was in the press. I don't know if he was one who who told me at the time, well, what happened to you? Why weren't you there at the press conference? Well, nobody understood this, but there could only be so much PR, and if it was negative to Mike Moore, it was negative by virtue of the fact that they had purloined and disseminated these documents to California through the means of which I didn't know at the time, but I knew they got out, certainly. I mean, but there was a whole effort there to make things difficult. But this particular lawsuit was, going to be a problem for Scruggs, and it didn't seem to affect him whatsoever. So going with the call from Fox in Louisville and stating the obvious, well, they shot you at the beach. They left you on the beach, but they pull this de minimis character out, who was a kind of Wally Cox character who had been the instrument of so much PR, and of course the relationship between PR, politics, and law, if you can side in either of those. But this was Mike Moore's basic concept. You got to work the PR, you got to work the politics.
What problems did Scruggs have thereafter? Did that PR event fail? What followed after that?
Well, before I get to that, let me answer you that I did get Scruggs. I got him on the phone, and this was after I talked to Myron Levin of the LA Times, and I said, "Can you find Dick Scruggs?" And he said, and I said, "Will you tell Dick Scruggs to call me, because I want to know what he has in mind for me, because I've got this federal lawsuit down here." And I had not discussed anything with him in terms of what Fox and I would do on the lawsuit in Louisville. I mean, obviously, what are you doing? You're publicizing this person simply because he held a high-ranking job, and the only knowledge that he had was from the documents that came out of the San Francisco community, which was run by Stanton Glantz, which came from the Burl Butts. The Burl case, which was Mr. Butts, which was later known as Don Barry, but instrumentally here, I got talking to Blase, and totally, he was just completely without any interest whatsoever. I said, "Dickie, what do you suppose that I'm supposed to do here?" And he said, with regard to this federal lawsuit, which I had a $68 million counterclaim on, and there was no, it was sort of like, what's the problem? Why don't you just do what I did? I mean, after all, Dickie Scruggs would be able to do this, but this was not his lawsuit. It could very well be his lawsuit. I mean, his name was not on it. There were John Does, but every one of those John Does were people in Mississippi. There were people like Ron Motley who were in South Carolina as well, but what they never did was, they put my name on it, and then they put the M&S Enterprises, and obviously to show connection between what was going to happen in the Louisville lawsuit, because they were trying to get the same information. But until later did I find out that Scruggs had no intention of putting me into any kind of situation which would involve the same category as the man who knew too much, who actually learned too much, which is what what I think is the more appropriate way of looking at it. On the other hand, this is just an honest statement. Scruggs just simply waved me off and said, "Why don't you drop your lawsuit? Just walk away from it." I said, "Hold on. You want me to drop my counterclaim, my lawsuit? No. I think we'll have problems here." And that was it. And I think that Scruggs, who was always on some kind of distant cloud, never recognized that he got the materials, which were the evidence, the only evidence. Forget about Bliley, forget about Liggett, forget about all this other. This was the evidence that was disseminated and so often proclaimed in the capturing of law fees later on. This was it. The Williams documents and the Brown and Williamson documents secondarily, but they actually call them the Williams documents, as did Brown and Williamson for that matter. But anyway, so just walk away from it. And I said, "Afraid he can't do that."
Did this PR event lead to another event in history of the master settlement?
Yeah, it was quietly obliterated, and I know that from the standpoint of Mike Moore, which I later see waltzing through Charlene Beauslarge's neighborhood and calling me up so that he can get a clear slate as to what his position would be in terms of the how he would be treated by me if something happened. And so he brought in Doug Levy, who was with USA Today for a while as a health reporter in 1994, and then he disappeared and ended up in California the last time I heard. Anyway, what transpired was the concept that they would go into it with another party, and that would be Christine Gregoire of the state of Washington, who was the attorney general there. Now as a governor. What you get?
How did Scruggs' position as a leader work out for you? Did you sue him?
There was a point where I had called, essentially Scruggs did not want to honor any commitment, as was the case often the case. I know that in the case of Richard Denard, who had some kind of verbal agreement, the idea was to make it hard and to capture that lawsuit. If he walked away and all the people in Mississippi who were in that lawsuit, who were unnamed but nevertheless were part of it, it would be essential that they would have to have me dismissed. And so I started looking around. I talked to Cindy Locke, who was actually...
And how about Mike Moore?
Mike Moore was always involved in everything whatsoever, except he was an attorney general and he was immunized at the time. And so the prudent part of this was, I think that no, I didn't sue, but I think that the tentacles of what could happen were explained to him by various lawyers, and before he could actually collect any money for any big money, so forth. That doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to be sued. Or Mike Moore, for that matter.
Mike Moore describes the team he had as working with politics, public relations, and law. His work. What did he do?
He had this theory. In the history of this, you will have to allow him some degree of levity, because at the time he was quite popular. Now he's just sort of living in a foxhole somewhere, I think, as a lawyer. But the idea of a a a concept of what he was doing. I think it developed from the very beginning because he had some professionals, which had been in the Clinton administration, and they said, if you're going to attack this, you're going to have to use the strongest PR you can get. You're going to have it involved with politics, and of course, there was no sparing of the names. Since Scruggs was Lot's brother-in-law, and there's all kinds of chicanery that goes on here, and you knew it. And yet he was a majority leader at the time, and pushing this through. Politics was, this was a useful tool, and PR was something that he learned to manipulate. He did manipulate mostly through the favorable part of the press, which was Lowell Bergman, who, and I believe there were a couple of people who were hired guns in terms of recording the events. Michael Ory seemed to be standing alone, but no, I know he worked for the Wall Street Journal eventually. Whenever something happened, though, they would revert to the Wall Street Journal. There was an absolute connection between the Wall Street Journal and Scruggs and the Motley Group, and more. As to the component of law, I mean, they just used it as they saw fit, and this was not what happened, as I will tell you later, in the Michigan settlement, which is just one of the collection departments that they went to starting right after 1999, in that period of time. So what essentially happened is where all of the people got together and ended up in one way or another as characters or caricatures. And it's pretty much this way today. I mean, you look around you and you see caricatures, because 12 years after the settlement, so to speak, people just have nothing. And you look at articles about tobacco, and there's nothing. There's no attack dogs. There's no, certainly you can't consider Matt Myers, who's disappeared into some kind of alien force out there working for Michael Bloomberg, because I guess he's not making any more money in the U.S. Essentially, what you have is a very sarcastic point of view. You have to, because they won nothing, they were defeated at everything, and so what this first settlement was about was only the actual elimination of Mike Moore as the leader, and bringing in Christine Gregoire to finish it off, so to speak. And since I was often kept out of the loop, I wasn't surprised at all to see this event in June of 1997 transpire, and did transpire, and they did shoot me at the beach. Not long, but I continued. I just see this, the things that have happened in this whole thing have been absolute failures. There's no question about it. If you analyze what the goal was, and then you see what they knew and what they didn't know, and what they needed to know, if they were serious about making any changes, they didn't make them. And so this PR event, these are the elements that Mike Moore depends on. He did depend on the public relations, the politics, and then whatever papers had to be filed, such as the ones that were filed in Ohio and in Michigan and Hawaii and God knows. Looks very much like that list that had my name misspelled on it, and maybe that's what it really is. It's a mystery still. In any case, that was the part that made some kind of an ending. Not really sure if that's really where the ending is, but we'll see. I'll have to get back into the dark. Hard. I'm on. And we are closing